This is for students who don't have a master's degree. If you have a master's degree, then usually that is sufficient to meet the minimum entry requirements for a PhD level program at a UK institution. But the one thing to be clear about is often in the UK, different institutions and different departments will insist on students having a master's before they apply to a PhD. The reason for that, and this is from UK students, the reason for that is because in the UK, an undergraduate degree is usually 3 years in duration, sometimes 4, and does not include much research experience for that student. They may have a little bit of research in which they're required to write a short dissertation, but often during a master's course in the UK, that is when the student is taught more about conducting research and has the opportunity and often the obligation to actually conduct some research themselves, again, either on their own or as part of a group. And that's the reason why often in the UK, academics insist upon students studying a master's first, so that they can be confident that those students do have at least some research experience. Now, with students coming from other countries, particularly coming from Brazil, where an undergraduate degree can be 5 years in length, usually those students do have a lot more research experience than students from the UK who have done an undergraduate degree. And it's for that reason that I've put a question mark after the master's degree, because certainly from my experience in talking to academics at UCL, it's not absolutely necessary, it's not obligatory for a student coming from Brazil to have studied a postgraduate or a master's after the undergraduate study, for reasons I've already mentioned. However, if you don't have a master's qualification, if you don't have a postgraduate qualification, you need to make the academic or your potential supervisor aware that you have sufficient research experience. So when you get in contact with an academic, when you get in contact with a potential supervisor or supervisors in the UK, you need to make it clear to them of the level of research experience that you have. So when you first write to them, you may say that you only have an undergraduate degree, but studied that degree in Brazil, it took you 5 years, you've studied courses in research methodology, you've published some research papers, or you've worked on some research projects, and you need to reassure that academic that despite not having a master's qualification, you are comfortable conducting research. That's the main thing that they are interested in. And in addition, you will need to convince them that you have a detailed knowledge of your subject area, so that you might construct an interesting research proposal. But I'll talk about that in a little while. In terms of English language qualifications, again, this varies from institution to institution and from department to department within those institutions, depending on exactly the type of research you're going to be doing. As a general rule, if you're doing research in mechanical engineering, the requirements for the English language level is not going to be as high as research in law or English literature. So you need to get in contact with universities on an individual basis and find out exactly what their entry requirements are for the English language. The UK government has recently changed the visa rules, so the universities do not have as much flexibility with what we require for English language as we did in the past. The minimum level at the moment to be granted a visa to come and study in the UK is level B2, and that is equivalent to IELTS 5.5 or TOEFL 65. But you need to be careful. That's the bare minimum to be granted your visa. Individual institutions will have higher requirements, and indeed, my own institution does have higher requirements with this. Funding is the other thing to be wary of. Some institutions will only consider applicants who have already secured their funding. And on the application forms, they will ask you to tell them exactly how you intend to fund the PhD, and they will take that into consideration when they assess your application. Many others, my own included, do not necessarily take funding into consideration when they evaluate your application forms. But it is something you will need to think about, and you will be wise to consider how you're going to fund the PhD when you're thinking about making your application. And I'll talk a little bit about sources of funding a bit later. How to apply. Now again, this is very, very general information, but the thing to remember is that applications for a PhD are very, very different to applying for a master's course. Usually for a master's course, you don't need to get in touch with the institution or the department in advance. You complete the application form, you make sure you have the necessary academic requirements, you make sure you have your transcripts and good references, etc., etc. Then you send the application to the institution, and if you meet the requirements and they like the requirements, they like your application, they will make you an offer to come and study the masters at that institution. At PhD level, it's very different, and the reason it's very different is because there is a certain amount of dialogue and discussion that needs to happen first before you make your application. I said beforehand that some students have a very fixed idea about the exact research proposal that they want to pursue at a particular institution or at a particular research centre. And so what can happen is that you can get the application form, you can find that you've got all the necessary requirements, you can complete your research proposal, you can send it to an academic at the department, and they look at the form and they say, this is not really my area. And you've wasted all of your time in preparing a nice application form and writing a good research proposal, and it's just been wasted. For that reason, the way that applications for a PhD works, and I think I'm right in saying this is general for most UK institutions, is the first thing you need to do is you need to do a bit of background research. As I said, you need to look at things like the research assessment exercise. You need to go on the internet. You need to Google various different academics that you're interested in. You need to identify academics at different institutions who have the same research interests that you have, who can cover the same sort of subject. There are various ways to do this. You can email a department at an institution and say, I'm thinking of doing a PhD in this area. Here is my rough research proposal. Can you recommend some academics within your department that I can contact? And then hopefully the department will send you an email back with a recommendation of a few academics who have similar interests, and then you can contact them directly. The alternative is to go onto a university's website, look at the academics within the department, read about the academics yourself, and identify academics who you think would be suitable to supervise your research project, your PhD. Either way, the objective of this is to find the contact details of academics that would be suitable and to get in touch with them directly. And when you get in touch with an academic, there are a few things you need to include. You need to include, obviously, who you are, what you've studied, what your qualifications are, where you studied. You need to say that you're interested in studying a PhD in this department, in this university, and you need to give them a summary of your research proposal. Now, I usually advise prospective PhD students to limit this to about 300 words, no more, just to give the academic an idea of the sort of thing you want to research. It's perhaps a good idea, or certainly a good idea, to include exactly what you want to get out of the PhD, out of the thesis, what your objectives are, but you might also consider including information on your methodology, or what tools you intend to use in order to conduct your PhD.